Well, hello and welcome to you all, wherever you are in the world. It's a great pleasure to have you on board today. I'm Becky Anderson, joining you from CNN's Middle East Broadcasting Hub in Abu Dhabi here in the UAE. And what a time to be gathering. We are living through a pivotal point in history, with the COVID-19 pandemic acting as both catalyst and inventor of once unimaginable change in our daily lives, from how we live, how we work and how we socialise, to how our children access their education, and to how the global order of geostrategic alignment itself is being reshaped in front of our eyes. May you live in interesting times, said to be a curse from ancient China. That has truly been the maxim of this, our modern era. Well, for the last 20 years, the Warwick Economics Summit has built a reputation as a leading platform for discussion about the most pressing issues of our times, an opportunity to debate the here and now and what's to come with global leaders who are shaping our world. So it is my great pleasure today to introduce Her Majesty Queen Rania of Jordan, who I am honoured to say I've known for many years, and over the years I've had the privilege of spending time with Her Majesty, getting a first-hand look at her pioneering initiatives in education and entrepreneurship, which are at the heart of her commitment to bettering the lives of all Jordanians, with a real focus on empowering women and children, which we will discuss today. And over the years, Queen Rania and I have also spoken at great length about the importance of tolerance around the world and of Her Majesty's efforts to promote a greater understanding and acceptance of people of all faiths and cultures, with a particular focus on challenging stereotypes of Arabs and Muslims. And against the backdrop of the pandemic that we are living with today, these are all valuable topics that I hope we can develop in our discussion today. Well, Your Majesty, it is a great delight to see you again. How are you?
I'm doing great, Becky, and it's great to be speaking to you. And thank you for that introduction and for the great reporting you always do.
Well, no, thank you very much indeed. Let's just jump straight in. COVID-19 is clearly the backdrop to this discussion, and the equitable distribution of vaccines is, and rightly so, one of the most important topics that we are reporting on today, and I know you are interested in discussion. Jordan, of course, one of the very few countries promising and delivering vaccines for refugees, and that is something we applaud. We know, Queen Rania, that vaccine nationalism is rife. We know it will cost many lives and perhaps will cost millions as far as the global economy is concerned, perhaps billions, if not trillions, according to the latest reports. On an economic level and on an empathetic level, what is your case, to your mind, for the equitable distribution of vaccines?
Well, you know, like my husband, His Majesty King Abdullah, has said, vaccines are a global public good, and they should be viewed as such. Sadly, that hasn't been the case. Even before pharmaceuticals were given the green light to mass produce and sell their vaccines, the majority of doses were pre-ordered by wealthy nations. So according to the vaccine watchdog, the People's Vaccine Alliance, some wealthy nations ordered enough doses to inoculate their populations 3 times over. Whereas lower income countries, on the other hand, will at best only manage to vaccinate 1/10 of their populations. And so I see no reason why those who have excess supply can't donate their surplus to poorer countries. And I'm glad that some countries have committed to doing just that. I'm also glad that some countries have signed on to support and donate to COVAX, which is hoping to deliver upwards of 1 billion doses by the end of the year to low-income countries. I think it's an imperative to make sure that vaccine equity is a priority for us, because, we do have a cloud hanging over our heads, all of us, not just the poor nations. Whether you're wealthy or poor, whether you're a high income or low income nation, we have a cloud of unevenness over us. And this unevenness is not just in terms of how people have been impacted, some much more severely than others, but also on our ability to recover. So, like high-income countries are able to provide the economic stimulus, whereas lower-income countries and emerging markets do not have the fiscal space to provide liquidity to their economies, which will help them recover. And as a result, you're seeing if countries are unable to recover, then there's going to be instability and insecurity for all of us. And no matter how wealthy you are as an individual or as a nation, no amount of wealth will shield you from the real anger and hostility that's out there. I feel a very potent anger among people because of the inequality that we're seeing. This pandemic has really revealed and reinforced cracks in our world order, along lines of income inequality, gender inequity, social injustice, and you can't add health inequality on top of that, So it is absolutely imperative that we really address these issues. If we're not motivated from a moral or ethical responsibility, then at least we should be motivated from a global health standpoint. We're all in a race against a pandemic, not against each other. And it's not a cliche to say that until all of us are safe, none of us are safe. If anybody was uncertain about how interconnected our world is, I think this disease, the way it has spread, has really demonstrated that we're just so interconnected that we, as nations and individuals, cannot recover until everybody else is able to recover.
While children around the world, wherever they live, be it the developed or developing, the richer or poorer nations, have been impacted by this pandemic. But the issue of education inequality lies at the heart of much of what you and I have discussed over the years and has been exacerbated by the current crisis. You and I, as I say, have been discussing education for years. I just want to play a brief clip of us speaking more than 10 years ago, back in 2009. Have a look at this.
There are 75 million children who are not going to school. 41 million of them are girls. These are girls who are out of school, they're out fetching water, they're out farming fields, out weaving carpets, out getting married early. When we think of girls, we think of them as being soft and vulnerable, and that they might not be the solution necessarily to the world's toughest problems, but they really are. Educating a girl gives her self-respect and self-confidence. She gets married later in life, has fewer children, has a healthier family, works to build a more prosperous community. So they could be part of the solution.
The Secretary General of the UN in just the past few days saying that this pandemic is an opportunity to reimagine education itself. Given the existing problems, I wonder what you believe can be done towards ensuring equity of education, access to education for all. With the initiatives that you and I discussed back in 2009, you have been at the forefront of some of the most pioneering initiatives in the field. So what are your thoughts at this point?
Well, firstly, I think COVID-19 has caused the greatest disruption to education in human history, with school closures affecting upwards of 1.6 billion learners around the world. Even in the best of times, access to education has never been fair. But the disparities that we're seeing today, both within and across countries, are quite staggering. A child's fate literally hinges on which side of the digital divide they fall, and far too many, millions in fact, are falling on the wrong side. During lockdowns, most of the governments, around 70% of them, offered some kind of remote instruction. But according to UNICEF, around 460 million students were completely cut off from any kind of remote learning. And that's not surprising when you consider that 40% of the world's population does not even have internet access. Add to that the need for remote-ready classrooms and teachers, mobile infrastructure, and time and space at home, and the barriers to online learning just keep rising. And although online learning has really been a lifeline for many students around the world, until it is universally accessible, then it's going to continue to fall tragically short. Even within wealthy countries, like for example in the UK, the differences across income levels are quite stark. So last year in the UK, poor students missed more days of school than their richer counterparts, which increased the learning gap between the two groups by 50%. One way to reinforce and sort of build resilience in our education systems is through the expansion of hybridization. Now is the time to truly invest in in-person and remote learning methods and to really build the capacities to deliver on them. Online learning solutions aren't just band-aid measures for temporary problems. They really reinforce our education systems by, offering contingency options for us. And in my opinion, if they are delivered universally and if they're delivered effectively, they can once and for all provide an opportunity to really equalize the quality of education across different income levels, circumstances, abilities, and that's something we really need. So I really do believe it's the future of learning. And I'd like to also mention that really as a global community, we need to prioritize closing the global education funding gap. Because UNESCO is warning that it's reaching $200 billion a year. Now that might sound like a lot, but when you think that it's only 10% of military global expenditure, I think there's no excuse for us not to make an effort to really close that gap.
No, that's a very good point. You and I have also talked about the gender gap in learning and the learning disparities between girls and boys. And we know that the pandemic could really exacerbate those inequalities. And not just in the classroom, of course, but at work as well. A new report from McKinsey, Queen Rania, putting the differential between allowing regressive effects on women versus taking a proactive approach to advancing gender equality at around $14 trillion in 2030. That is the GDP of China, a huge number, and that will affect men and women alike. How do you see that lack of equality at work and also the overall transformation of our working lives as we move forward?
Right. I think this pandemic has really upended the entire working population, but some things have remained painfully constant. And I think the barriers to women's employment have been holding strong. And even those women who are working are not receiving nearly the amount of support that they need. First of all, women are more likely to be employed in sectors that have been impacted by lockdowns. And when jobs are scarce, they're the first to be let go. And the school and daycare closures have been nothing short of a full-scale crisis for a lot of working moms. In the UK alone, 1 in 5 women had to either quit their jobs or were forced to leave. Now that is really tough on mothers and families, but it's also terrible for our global economy. Like you mentioned, the McKinsey study warns that by 2030, the growing gap between men and women's employment is going to come at a cost of $1 trillion to global GDP. That's a lot of money being left at the table, But today we really do have an opportunity to completely revamp, rethink, redesign the workplace so that it better meets the needs of men and women. Employers need to adopt and adapt family-friendly, flexible work models that allow parents to progress in their careers without really feeling that they're compromising on having a well-rounded life or on their family relationships. I think one way to ensure that women's needs are always taken into consideration is to guarantee that there are more women in the room. whether it's boardrooms or important policy decisions, I think we still have a lot of room to grow in that regard. A lot of our targets have still not been met in terms of gender equity, both in representation and in compensation in the workplace. When it comes to the workplace in general, you know, this crisis has posed a lot of aspects of our lives, but it's also fast-forwarded many others. And I think the future of work, with all its potential benefits and pitfalls, is one of them. I'm by no means an expert, but I think the way we think about work will never be the same again. Studies show that the majority of skilled workers now prefer a blend of a home office work arrangement. So employers who don't embrace that flexibility will be at a disadvantage when it comes to recruiting new talent. I also think that the flexible workplace is more inclusive because it brings in people who were traditionally shut out from the workplace because of their circumstances. So for example, single parents, people with disabilities, even talented refugees abroad. But the option to work from home still remains elusive to many around the world. According to the World Bank, in the higher income countries, 1 in 3 jobs can be done from home, but that number goes down to 1 in 26 in lower income countries. And as our reliance on machines continues to increase, those same jobs that cannot be done from home, so for example, bank tellers, factory workers, cashiers, those jobs are the ones that are going to be disappearing, and much sooner than we think. Global recessions and accelerated automation have caused a double disruption, which, according to the World Economic Forum, will mean that jobs will be divided equally between humans and machines by 2025. That's in 4 years' time. And that will eliminate about 85 million jobs. Now, we will be able to make up for these jobs in the green economy and in technology, but it means that we have to move very quickly to reskill and upskill our workers so that they remain relevant to the job market. So what this pandemic has done is that it's removed the luxury of time. The fourth industrial revolution is well underway with AI, genetic engineering, the Internet of Things, robotics making huge leaps. And so we really need to be careful to make sure that these technologies serve all citizens in human-centered ways. And we need to move very quickly to protect our more vulnerable workers.
I wonder whether you think that as the poor are getting poorer, especially in developing countries, even such as Jordan itself, whether you believe we will see a further crisis for globalization, and just how effective do you believe leadership is and can be going forward, given that so much is under assault?
Look, I mean, from the beginning of this crisis, everybody has suffered some kind of loss, whether it's a loss of opportunity, security, or worst of all, loss of loved ones. But this loss hasn't been felt equally. For some, the pandemic has been very disorienting, whereas for others, it has been truly devastating. So as some have said, we may be in the same storm, but we're not in the same boat. So for example, you're seeing some people enjoying the benefits of the rebounding global markets. But far too many people around the world are suffering from parallel pandemics of hunger, violence, illiteracy. In fact, for the first time in 20 years, extreme poverty is back on the rise. And so really this pandemic has shone a light on pre-existing cracks in our world order. It's really reinforced and exposed fissures along the lines of inequality, as I mentioned earlier, whether it's racial, gender, social injustice, and all these issues that we failed to address in the past. And again, this is creating a very dangerous, destabilizing situation for all of us. And so we can no longer just put these problems, these problems are not biodegradable. They're not going to go by themselves. So we need to be very serious about addressing these issues because there's a great divergence happening in our world. whether it's across geographies, income levels, generations. And this anger you cannot shield yourself. In an interconnected world, you cannot shield yourself from this anger. I would like to point out, however, that this period has also shown some of our strengths as an international community. So even though there is room for improvement, I think the global effort to try to combat and cure this virus has probably been the most coordinated worldwide response to any crisis in human history. So if we take the development of vaccines, for example, I think it would have taken us years to get to this point had it not been for the coordination and the collaboration of the medical community. And so that was a really shining, undeniable example of how a crisis can fuel innovation, and how when we put our politics and national identities to one side and work towards a common goal, we can achieve so much for so many. So moving forward in a post-pandemic world, which spirit do we want to carry forward? Do we want to try and likely fail to go it alone? Or do we want to agree to make everybody's well-being our new bottom line and really try to work to achieve that? I think that we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to try to reimagine new socioeconomic systems and to exercise bold and visionary leadership and create a new normal that provides opportunity for everyone. You know, I think we need a new North Star to guide economic policy, new metrics that go beyond just measuring GDP, but actually look at environmental and social criteria. The private sector have a big role to play. I know some companies are already heading in that direction, but they really need to institutionalize the practice of aligning corporate success with social progress. Again, integrating financial metrics with relevant non-financial criteria. For example, measuring greenhouse effects, gender equity, whether in terms of compensation or representation. All those things are incredibly important. Whatever normal we go back to, I know that we cannot go back to the old normal that left too many people behind. Because if we've learned one thing from this crisis is that we're only as strong as the weakest among us. So I don't think we should lose this opportunity to really try to right a lot of the wrongs in our world. And the last thing we need now is to just have these inequalities further deepened, because as I said before, this is going to be destabilizing for everyone.
Queen Rania, you're making some very, very valuable points. And as we close this out, it's also good to hear your thoughts on how this can be an opportunity and one that may be an equalizer or more of an equalizer going forward. Finally, I do want to ask you a question, not as Queen Rania, but as a loving wife and devoted mum, which I know you are. How has your life changed for yourself and for your family?
You know, look, I think everyone during this time will have felt a little bit detached or isolated. I think, you know, when our lives migrated online overnight, not even the most advanced networks could sort of protect us from feeling a little bit disconnected. And I know that loneliness became a parallel pandemic of sorts for many people. In the UK, 50% of remote workers suffered from it, and a quarter of all adults during lockdowns. And when your emotional health takes a hit, so does your outlook on life. There have been studies that have shown a link between loneliness and populism. Because lonely people are more likely to view the world as a hostile place, which makes them easy targets for exploitation by populists who want to pit us against one another. Now, I think it's only natural for us to lean on our smartphones and devices in these isolating times. But I think our skyrocketing screen times have been part of the problem. And youth in particular are particularly vulnerable because you know, the unrelenting pressure from fast-paced media means that they're more likely to be exposed to hate and bigotry. Now, I'm not advocating that we should reject social media wholesale, because nothing is inherently totally good or bad. I think it's just how we conduct ourselves we need to be a bit more thoughtful about how we use these media. We need to be not just disciplined, but even draconian in our efforts to avoid negative or counterproductive content. And I think this pandemic has given us perspective on the importance of cultivating close relationships, not just building networks of distant friends and followers. And that has been part of the silver lining. I mean, I know that for many families, myself included, it was just, I really found it a blessing to have all my kids in one place. You know, there are different stages in their lives, some in school, some in university, some working. So for the first time in a long time, we were able to be together in one place for an extended period of time and to have that quality time together. I think, you know, this pandemic has reminded us of our common vulnerability, but it's also shown us that we are stronger and more resilient than we think. None of us are the same people we were this time last year. There's been collective trauma, but I think there's been a lot of collective growth. And for me in particular, it's also given me a little bit of reprieve from being in the public space. You know, I've been doing this for close to 21 years. So just being at home for a while with my family, despite all the pressures outside, that has been really something that I would consider a blessing.
Your Majesty, Queen Rania of Jordan, it has been an absolute privilege. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to the Warwick Economics Summit. Congratulations again on your 20th year. And from both of us, Queen Rania and myself here at CNN Abu Dhabi, thank you for joining us. Take care, be well, and wherever you are in the world, do stay safe.